VikesNow. I am Dustin Baker. We are 15 days on the countdown to the NFL draft. A grand climax for these Vikings. Yesterday, we had Paul Allen on for an unforeseen 38 minutes. It was spectacular. The guy messaged me afterwards, said he wants to come back, and he means it. So we will probably have him back maybe before the draft, but certainly after it. Josh, you're back in the saddle today. Just me and you again, back to the old Wednesday routine. How are you, man?
I'm doing good, man. Still riding high after that Paul Allen episode yesterday. If viewers haven't gotten a chance to give it a watch, definitely do that because it was a ton of fun. And I think Paul definitely dropped a few pretty spicy nuggets there in regards to the Vikings draft in a couple weeks. So really great time. Hope we can have him on again soon.
I agree. And the other cool part is I've been listening to him for 26 years and he revealed shit yesterday I didn't even know about. I didn't know about being hard up in his 30s and all that. I didn't know he had to audition almost like bootstrap levitation. You never know that stuff. And then we just kind of revealed it in our show. So I thought that was particularly cool. So we will have him back. It's just a matter of when at this point. We're going to get into quarterback rankings. I told Josh, who has a list of like 50, I was like, dude, we got to cap it to 8. So we're going to count them down from 8 collectively. But first, there were 2 things burning on my mind that I want to get from Josh. So since we started this draft analysis in January, basically since we understood the Vikings weren't going to make the postseason last year, we've been doing the draft stuff. And it dawned on me that your guy in January, and probably still is Jaden Daniels. I think you also like Drake May almost by osmosis through this show. And then JJ McCarthy has become everybody's darling. Is it fair to say that any of those 3 guys at 10 p.m. Central Time on draft night, you'll be happy with?
I'd be stoked with any of them. Yeah.
Okay.
I think each and every one of them definitely has the NFL upside to be not only a starting quarterback, but a star quarterback at the NFL level. And we'll get into each and every one of them once we start doing our rankings here. But yeah, I don't think if one of those 3 is the option, then I'm walking away on Thursday night a very happy camper.
Okay. And you would be the happiest if there was a Jaden Daniels slide, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. That's still your holy grail.
Yes. I think Jaden Daniels he's just got so much talent and just the arm, the running ability. Again, we'll get more into it in a little bit, but yeah, Jaden Daniels is the cream of the crop behind Caleb Williams for me.
Okay. And the other thing that I have, because I wrote about this on Vikings territory like 10 minutes ago, is earlier this week, NFL.com, Maurice Jones-Drew, everybody has a mock draft. He did one as well. He had Drake May to the Vikings, but that wasn't even the headline. It was at number 5 with the Chargers, which would insinuate the Vikings wouldn't have to trade a king's ransom, like 3 first-rounders and more. Then, today, Pete Prisco, CBS Sports, did the same thing. Neither one of them revealed the trade price, but they had Drake May at number 5 via trade with the Chargers. So is this just, boredom in the draft cycle? You got to do something different, or can you actually see Drake falling to number 5?
I think especially if what Thor has kind of alluded to the last couple times that he's been on the show, if somebody, either the Patriots or the Commanders, are just enamored with JJ McCarthy, I think that's a very possible chance. I don't know if 5 would necessarily be the spot that the Vikings need to get to, because if Drake May starts falling past number 3, Denver, Las Vegas, maybe even New Orleans are definitely going to be like, okay, we can go up and get this guy. He's going to be the QB of our future. So I think it's going to be a little bit of a bidding war to get up. And I think 4 would probably be the spot that you got to go in order to get him. But maybe Arizona's just completely settled that we need a wide receiver. We need Marvin Harrison Jr. on our roster alongside Kyler Murray. So if that's the case, then yeah, I mean, Drake May, if he starts falling, then I mean, yeah, it's definitely a possibility. I can't really say at this point that anything's not a possibility other than maybe Caleb Williams falling that far. But yeah, it would definitely be a really great scenario for the Vikings if that ended up happening.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you really, outside of him falling to 11, which I don't even think you can afford to see if that happens.
Can you imagine?
Oh, my God. Yeah, and then you could, at 23, get Quinion Mitchell. You can get the best edge on the board. But I just, don't think that without insider knowledge from the Broncos and Raiders that, hey, nobody wants May anymore, I just don't think you can hang out that far. In fact, I know you can't. All right, so you think there is a little bit to a Drake May tumble. Like, it's not completely outlandish. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, especially if a lot of the reports like New England doesn't like him, and if he ends up being there at 3 and it's between him and JJ McCarthy, then I mean, if they don't like Drake May, they're probably just taking JJ McCarthy. So I do think it's possible at least.
Yeah, well, they've had some luck with Michigan quarterbacks. We'll say
Yeah.
that. All right, let's go through these quarterback rankings. We'll start at 8, and I think the context here, it's tricky for me to do quarterback rankings because I always want to envision how their career is going to pan out.
Yeah.
But we can't do that until we see, which coach they're going to be aligned with. So I'm going to intermix some of my theories about their careers, but we've done this based on, their skill set, watching the tape, the scouting reports that we've read. And then why don't you start at number 8? Tell me who that man is and why he lives at that spot.
Number 8, I'm going to go with the guy who's maybe had the wildest ride in terms of his college career in this entire QB class, and that's Spencer Rattler out of South Carolina. Obviously began at Oklahoma. He was viewed as arguably one of the better QB prospects we've ever seen when he first stepped on the field with the Sooners, and then the whole Caleb Williams thing happened. Lincoln Riley leaves for USC, and then he ends up going to South Carolina, and he's definitely had some moments at South Carolina, and I think, honestly, this spring has quietly been really great for Spencer Rattler in terms of his draft stock. And honestly, I wouldn't be all that surprised if he's a guy that somebody takes a shot on in round 2. Kind of that sort of area, the top 50 or something like that. If QB starts fall, if he's there and a QB needy team is picking us at one of those spots, I think that's definitely possible. But there's just so much variability with Rattler at this point. Like, some of the throws he makes, it's a great highlight reel if you want to just watch the highlights, but there are some bad moments in there too where he's overthrowing receivers. I don't necessarily think he has the greatest footwork in the world either. That's just my personal opinion, but yeah, Spencer Rattler at 8, definitely one of the bigger boomer bust candidates in this draft, and I think that's ultimately why he lands there.
I have at number 8 Michael Pratt from Tulane, and I do like him, believe it or not, but I have him pegged, and I think most general managers probably do too, as a guy who will probably go in round 2 or 3 and then live on the bench and then hope he's one of those guys that when his name's called, like, oh, sweet, yeah, we were right about this guy. He's pretty good. But he's arguably the most pocket passer in this draft, and that's fine. I like those. We had one for 6 years, but I don't know that translates well enough when you could have your cream of the crop of the rest of this group. He's not very fast. I think his 40 was like slower than a tight end, which is fine. If he can just be chill in the pocket and do the thing, then great. But when I watch his tape, there isn't a whole lot of fluidity. Like, it seems like, yeah, with some refinement, he'll be okay. But if we're doing top 8 rankings, I have Pratt at number 8. Will you have him on your list at all?
He comes in at number 7 for me, so just ahead of Rattler.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why don't you go ahead and launch into him now, and then I'll get into my number 7 because it's you can either correct the record of what I said or pile on.
Okay. So yeah, Michael Pratt. I think he lands at number 7 just because I think if a team's going out there and they want a quarterback, but they've already got somebody in place, I think Pratt can be an excellent backup. And I think at that point in the draft, if you're looking day 2, maybe early day 3, Pratt definitely is capable of doing that. Like you said, he's a solid pocket passer. He doesn't move a ton, but for a backup QB, you kind of want more stability rather than the crazy plays that you'll see with a Spencer Rattler where he's running all over the place, stuff like that. Whereas Pratt just stays calm, cool, collected. He's got great QB size. I do think he has a touch of mobility, and that definitely disappeared a little bit after he suffered his knee injury this past season, which he played through, but definitely didn't play that great down the stretch of the season. I think 2022 shows a lot more of what he's capable of as a quarterback, and that's why I ended up putting him a little bit ahead of Rattler, but I kind of see them in the same sort of tier.
Yeah. I want to give my little quarterback speech about backup quarterbacks that I give about 2 or 3 times per year. If Pratt goes off the board in round 3 or round 4, it's really hard for some football fans to stomach, like, this guy is drafted to be the backup quarterback because we all think it's going to be Brady or Purdy or to an extent Kirk or Dak. But I swear to God, just like the Vikings drafted Oli Udoh in 2019, we knew that guy was going to be a backup tackle, and he's been a really good backup tackle. So when Jaron Hall was drafted in round 5 last year, yes, you can have a glimmer of hope that he's the next big thing. But quarterbacks certifiably are selected in drafts in mid to late rounds to be backup quarterbacks. And so when I look at Pratt, when I look at the film, that's what I'm like, you know what? This is the guy who will get a chance that, you know, when somebody gets down, we'll be like, oh, yeah, I remember him from the 2024 draft. He looks pretty good. I was right. But not every guy on this list has to be a day one starter because there are roles for backup quarterbacks. The Vikings can tell you all about it from last year.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you place the nail on the head there. And it's just Pratt, I think he definitely has the ceiling to be a starter, but it's definitely not going to be in 2023. I think down the stretch, you give him a year, learn the offense. And then if you're, say, the Titans and you're either sick of Will Levis or Ryan Tannehill, whatever, you want to throw him in there. The Titans is a really bad landing spot for him, considering how many quarterbacks they have. But if a team like that, where they're not necessarily sure about their quarterback position at this point, maybe he's a guy in 2025 you can throw out there and say, hey, we want to see what you can do. Go out there and prove us.
Yeah, we're going to learn a lot about Malik Willis when we talk to Thor next. You remember my teaser last time? I want him to either defend that Willis is still going to be good or explain how he got it wrong. We'll see what he says. Number 7 for me is Bo Nix. And the reason that I have him so low, and I think I've told you this off air, is this big 6, and Nix would be at the 6 of the big 6. They're not going to be good. Half of them are going to suck. And I can't find any wiggle room where Nix is going to be one of the guys who's going to be like, oh, wow, we got it wrong. He was good. You skewed my opinion of him early on in this cycle about throwing underneath. And I'm like, oh, God, yeah, no. If we have a chance to get Drake May, let's not get the underneath guy, especially because I had to hear Kirk Cousins call the dink and dunker, which was false for 6 seasons. So with Nix, I do think there is the talent there. I remember whatever bowl they were in, I watched it, I think, driving back home from Minneapolis in January, and I thought this guy looks pretty good. But when you dig deeper into it, I think they scored like 40-something points that game. I do see the deficiencies, or at least compared to some of the other guys, that he doesn't quite have the total package. Now, if he would have lived inside the 2022 draft, he might have been better than Pickett, and that's the variance in draft classes. But I keep coming back, unless we have a draft that is rich beyond belief. I mean, if you look back at 2018, if you transplant us on this show 6 years ago, there's no way we could have ever foresaw Sam Darnold being bad, Josh Rosen being bad. And the only 2 guys really good coming from that, Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. It's basically about half are going to be like, you know what, that guy's a good starter. And I just don't know how Nix is going to surpass Caleb, May, Daniels, and be that guy. So I'm using a little bit of histrionics here. That is my number 7. I know I'm going to go with my number 6 because I know you don't have this guy at number 6 is Spencer Rattler. And the reason I have him ahead of Nix is I kind of like that reckless style that he has. I'm a Nick Mullins guy. Watching the Vikings play last year, I enjoyed having a signal caller who was a little rebellious. And I will swear until I die or it's no longer relevant that the Vikings defense didn't die the moment that Mullins took over. We would be really positive about Mullins right now, thinking like, this guy's sweet. But with Rattler, I think he needs to certainly go to a place and a coach who's going to teach him to tame it down. And when I watch that recklessness that's been pointed out, I'm like, well, yeah, I know all about that with Mullins, and that's not going to translate to a career starter. But then, you have the upside there. So I think if he gets the polish, and this depends on where he ends up, and he'll be kind of in that Pratt role where I don't think that somebody will anoint him QB1 right away. He can be good. There's a guy on Twitter. He used to work for PFF named Jackson McIntyre. And I think he's a Vikings fan, or at least he's heavily Vikings focused. He did this thread on Rattler like 2 weekends ago. And he ended up saying he would be surprised if Rattler didn't go in round 1. And I had to like scroll through it again, make sure I wasn't too tired reading it. So that must be his deep draft take is Rattler in round 1. But I do like what I see, but not for the Vikings, because to me, Rattler would be a half-measured solution of the past where you just get Tarvaris Jackson. You're like, hey, this will work. Or Mond, this guy is going to be good. And they're not similar quarterbacks, but no thanks for Rattler on me and the Vikings. But I think with the correct coach, like Sean McVay or something, then he could be decent. That is my number 6. Who is your number 6?
Yeah, my number 6 is Bo Nix. I did put him a little bit ahead of Rattler. I think you did it. You said it really well when you basically said there's very little wiggle room for Bo Nix at the NFL level. Like, he does a lot of things solidly, but he doesn't do anything great.
Yeah.
If you go on his like sports reference page or something, you just look at his completion percentage, look at his passing touchdowns, look at his rushing numbers, you'll say, damn, why isn't this guy going like top 10? Because he put up a lot of production at Oregon. But I think the thing that really scares me with Nix is just that Oregon offense. And obviously Justin Herbert was able to overcome it. But with Nix, it's just so many passes behind 5 yards downfield. And I think he was like over 100 passes that were behind the line of scrimmage this season. And that's just not something that's going to be sustainable at the NFL level. I think he has the talent to potentially push the ball a little bit more downfield. We saw him do it at Auburn, just not really all that consistently. And there were a couple times that he had some really nice passes at Oregon too, but it's just that consistency. And he's absolutely terrified of pressure. Every single time he faces pressure, he's scrambling out of the pocket. And that's why his rushing numbers are so high. Because whenever there's an inch of pressure near him, he's out of the pocket and he's gaining yards with his legs instead. And I think just a little bit more discipline in that area. If he can do that, I think he can translate to the NFL level. There's just, like you said, there's no wiggle room. He has to do absolutely everything correctly in order to find success because he doesn't have the great arm strength. His accuracy is great in the short field, but he very, very erratic downfield, especially at Auburn, where he was running more of an offense where it's not one read. And if you don't see that read right away, you're just scrambling, picking up yards. But yeah, if Bo Nix lands, it's kind of the same thing you were saying with Rattler. If he lands in the right spot where they can build an offense around him with a ton of really good receivers, and by the way, Minnesota has a lot of really good receivers, so maybe that's the spot where things could work out with Bo Nix. I wouldn't want to test that if I'm the Vikings, but I think there's a path for Bo Nix, but it's a very narrow one.
Bo Nix is the one guy in all of these rankings today. I'll start off by saying I absolutely do not think the Vikings will draft Michael Pratt or Spencer Rattler as their guy, as their solution. But there is a shred of my fiber that says at Nix at 23, that could be their compromise, like a minute chance. And he is the one guy out of all 8 of these guys where I will have to soul search in May, in June, to get excited about it. Because I've already ruled out Pratt and Rattler as the QB1 fix. The rest of the 5 guys, I don't have any problem warming up to, even Michael Penix. And I'm going to talk about him in a second. But with Nix, I asked Yannick Eckhart off air about 3 weeks ago, like, if he's the pick, what are we going to do? How long will it take us to be like, you know what? I could, how we did with Sam Darnold. Like, at first, when we saw that news, we were like, oh, God. All right. But then, fast forward a month and we're like, he's going to be QB1. He might be Baker Mayfield. You have to find reasons if you're a sports fan to be happy about the team. Otherwise, find another team or don't follow sports. So with Nix, he's the one guy that I asked myself, how long will I have to trust O'Connell? How many days and weeks will it take me to get excited about it? And so I think that's why he lives at the bottom of my rankings. That brings us to a top 5, and I'll let you lead off.
Yeah, number 5, I think I really like Michael Penix personally. I think he can step in and be a starter day one for a team. It's just the injuries are a big concern, and obviously he came back with a clear medical at the combine. I don't know necessarily how big of a deal that is per se, considering he's been not really playing football for a few months, so he definitely had a chance to heal up a little bit. And we saw him get banged up a little bit in that national title game against Michigan. But I think if you just want a guy who's definitely able to stand in the pocket, definitely has the arm strength to deliver sharp passes downfield, and he is able to go through his reads and go through his progressions and make the right sort of plays, I think Penix is a guy who can do that. And honestly, the athleticism, I think it's been a little bit underrated throughout this draft process too, just because he hasn't moved out of the pocket as much at Washington as he did at Indiana, because when he did it at Indiana, it definitely led to some injury problems. So I think he's capable of being a little bit more mobile, but is that going to derail his career and turn him into the next RG3 or something? That's the big concern. But if you just want a guy who's able to stand there and make the right passes, I think he's able to do that. And I think he's able to step into an offense day one and be a starting quarterback. The footwork needs some help, but that's what the coach is for.
Yeah.
That's what the coaching staff is for. And that's one of the easier things for a QB coach, for a head coach who's offensive minded to ultimately fix. So I'm not super worried about that. And I think that's why he's landing at number 5 for me.
I have him precisely. We're going to have some divergence, I can guarantee you, here after this one. But with Penix, I agree with you wholeheartedly, especially whenever I hear a first round anything, especially quarterback, when their weakness is footwork, I'm like, ooh, who could fix that?
Deal.
Yeah. Oh my God, coaches can't handle that one. This is like the first thing you start to fix. So I certainly don't have that. And then I think in January, somebody posted a flipped mirror image video of Michael Penix as a right-hander, and that shouldn't have been a revelation for me, but it was. I'm a visual learner, and I was like, wow, this is sweet. So if the Vikings draft Michael Penix, and kind of the same theory with Knicks, like they'll probably be able to get him at 11 or 23, and then, hey, we can get Latu from UCLA as well. That part will be really sweet, and I will immediately warm up and be excited about Penix. So let that be known. I don't give a shit that his footwork's bad. We'll figure that out. He's also fast. He's got everything in terms of the mobile quarterback, but he just doesn't use it because he doesn't want to get hurt. Thor told us all about that. My only problem is the injury. And if he was to go to the Seahawks or something, I wouldn't even worry about the injury because I don't care about them, and I'm sure they'll just work out dandy with him. But for the Minnesota Vikings, who are flirting with trading into the top 10 for the first time ever for a quarterback pick, I do not want to attach job securities, hopes, and dreams to the one guy that has the injury history. Because just like Marcus Davenport, people bitched last spring when he was signed. And we're like, oh, I got this injury-prone guy. We showed up, the guy's injury-prone. He disappeared because of an ankle sprain. And so if you are, a Davenport truther that said Kwesi's a dipshit for signing that guy, you have to apply that logic to Penix. And I wasn't a Davenport truther. I knew the guy was probably going to get injured because you told me about it. With Penix, there's bright flashing lights that say this guy is like Frankenstein put back together. And I think he'll be great on some other team, but for a snake-bitten franchise, there's no good reason to go get the one guy who has an injury report that's like longer than the Bible. So I think he's going to be a good quarterback, but it feels like Viking kicker voodoo with getting the injured quarterback. So I know that was a long rant about his injury history, and that shouldn't be used against him. But that's what my paranoia, in the fact that he's like, is he going to be 24 next month?
Yeah.
Yep. And that's my eye rolls on that. That's why I didn't want Hendon Hooker last year. It's like, really, we're getting the old guy? No. So age and injury history are a nope from me, but I do think the guy will be good if that makes any sense at all.
Definitely. And I do think I don't know necessarily if the left-handedness should necessarily impact the idea of drafting him, but to say the Vikings are on the verge of paying their left tackle like franchise money, it just doesn't really. It kind of rubs me the wrong way to go get a left-handed quarterback on top of that. So I don't know if that's necessarily a smart take, but that's just kind of how I feel about Penix too, and why I wouldn't be as excited if he landed with the Vikings as maybe some other team who can actually kind of warp their offensive line to more fit his style than the Vikings can right
now. I'll tell you what that is. That feeling that you have about, well, we're about to pay Darisaw $25 million. It's an eye roll. It's like, of course, we finally got the left tackle, and what are we going to do? We're going to draft a left-handed quarterback, so the guy doesn't really matter that much. It's just a quintessential eye roll. Who do you got at number 4? This is where we're going to go off the rails.
Number 4, I'm going with J.J. McCarthy. I think I said it yesterday with PA. This is kind of where I'm landing in terms of a draft prediction for the Vikings if they are going to trade up for a quarterback. Just because I'm not overly convinced that Drake May is going to fall that far, and I'm just not overly convinced that the Vikings are going to be willing to trade all this draft capital in order to get McCarthy. But at the end of the day, I think J.J. McCarthy is the boring pick of this first round. And I said that about C.J. Stroud last year, and I'm kind of applying it to McCarthy here too, where he does absolutely everything right. He doesn't do he doesn't have a ton of huge highlights on his list of plays, but he makes all the throws downfield. He's got decent arm strength, at least, if not very good. And at 21 years old, you can only expect that to get a little bit better as his NFL career progresses. So even if some people aren't overly sold on that, I'm not really concerned about it at all, because I do think it's going to get a little bit better once he gets to the NFL. And he runs a pro style offense at Michigan. He faces pressure very well. He doesn't panic when there's opponents in his face, and he delivers some really sharp passes downfield. Like even if you get him throwing on the boundary a little bit, there's some questions, but I think that's another thing that, hey, you get him in a room with Kevin O'Connell, Josh McCown, two former NFL quarterbacks who have been asked to do these very same things. They can at least coach him to be able to fix that part of his game. And everything else I really liked about JJ McCarthy. He's super mobile. I've comped him from the very beginning as a more mobile Kirk Cousins. And I know Vikings fans aren't going to be overly excited about another Kirk Cousins in their quarterback room, but I tell you what, a Kirk Cousins at 7 to 10 million per year sounds a lot better than a Kirk Cousins at 35 to 40 million per year. So I would be very happy if they ended up drafting JJ, but I think because he's a little bit more boring, that's why he lands at 4 for me.
Yeah, we were asked off air by one of our coworkers at Vikings Territory to come up with a bland and a bold prediction for the Vikings draft. And you picked McCarthy and I picked May as the bland prediction.
Yeah.
That's how immersed we are in assuming the Vikings are going to draft one of them, that it seems bland the Vikings would trade up to 3. And I felt like a dipshit typing that up. But I digress. My number 4, close your eyes, plug your ears, is Jaden Daniels. And it's not because of anything he does on the field. I just think that he's going to get bruised and battered at his stature, unless he shows up to mini camp or whatever and he weighs 225, 230 pounds. He does like to take off and run, unlike Penix, and I think he's going to get a rude awakening. Now, I don't have that paranoia that if the Vikings draft him, he's doomed. I'm going to guess that the Vikings draft him, he's going to be reined in a little bit so that he's not running as much as Lamar Jackson. But my biggest fear is not anything related to Jaden Daniels, and not skill set. He's not too crazy old. He's in the middle class of being old in this draft, but at 6'4", like 205, 210, whatever he is, for the way he plays, he's got to be, for me to be feel good about 225. And so when he takes off and tries to fill that Lamar Jackson role, I just think he's going to get walloped, and he's going to be one of those dudes that were like, just like Lamar Jackson for back-to-back seasons in 2021 and 2022, wasn't there for the postseason. So that is my grand fear, is that Jaden Daniels is not beefy enough to absorb the hits. And again, it has nothing to do with the skill set. Yannick Eckhart, again, he said when he watched all of this tape, Jaden Daniels might have had the best skill set he's ever seen of anybody. And so I agree with that to an extent. I'm just super, super paranoid he's going to get beat up. But I'm guessing we'll talk about Daniels in a little while for you. What does that bring us to number 3 for you?
Number 3, yeah. Mm-hmm. For me, I'm going with Drake May here. Drake May. Sorry. I think May, the big thing with him is just being able to do all the things that he does really well. And he does a lot of things really well. He moves around a lot. He has a great arm. He just needs to do things a little bit more consistently. Mm-hmm. And I think some of the hero ball aspects need to be taken, not necessarily out of his game, but reeled in a little bit. He definitely has the tendency to just dance around in the pocket, hold on to the ball a little bit too long, run into sacks, stuff like that, throw overmailed passes and throw interceptions that are just head scratchers sometimes. So I think that's the big concern with Drake May heading into the NFL, is he going to be a turnover machine? But on the upside, this dude, 6'4", 6'5", He's built like Josh Allen. He runs like Josh Allen a lot of the time. UNC actually did a lot of designed runs for him in their offense too, which I think is going to be a part of his game at the NFL level, because he's built to be able to handle that sort of thing. But with the speed, with the arm strength, with the accuracy needs to get a little bit better, but there are flashes where if he's on, kind of Kirk Cousins-esque, where if Kirk Cousins is on a heater, he's one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL, stuff like that. But on the downside, there definitely are some concerns there, and that's why he lands at number 3 for me in terms of his play.
I have McCarthy at number 3, and I don't really have anything negative to say about him. I think the only thing where I would look back in a couple years and be like, oh, I guess he wasn't that good, is because it seems like his persona of, happiness and national championship, like we might look back and be like, God, that his personality really dragged him into the top 5. He was a winner. And, like almost like Zach Wilson, the way that we got so immersed that, hey, if the 49ers love him, then they have to be right. Well, no, that was false. Like, just eternally happy and smiling. That's the only like the unfootball paranoia that I have looking at him. But I agree with all of your takes about him in terms of the mobility, when he wants to use it. He faced really stiff competition, kind of like we talked about Stroud last year. So he's got that in him. And it seems general managers have become enamored with he's just QB wins guy. And I hate that because there's more to football than QB wins. But hey, if it's going to translate well for the Vikings, then give it to me. I was worried about his frame too, but then he showed up at, it was the combine
or something. Yeah.
Combine at about 220. And then he's also just turned 21. And he should, like the rest of us, put on a little weight. So maybe before you know it, he's 230 and we're all golden. And I do like the way he throws the ball. So I don't have any huge reservations about McCarthy, and I will be really excited if he's the Vikings draft pick. I just think the next 2 guys are going to be better than him.
Yeah, that's fair. And I mean, the other thing about JJ is I think people aren't talking about enough is he just didn't have a ton of wide receiver talent at Michigan, and he still found a way to deliver the ball. Like, obviously he's not throwing as much as the rest of the quarterbacks in this class, but he wasn't asked to, he didn't need to, but when he did it really well, and to a lot of guys that aren't going to be top tier NFL receivers. So especially if you throw him into an offense with the Vikings where you've got Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, I think there's absolutely a path where he can thrive as not only a passer, but just being able to manage the game and win games for you.
That's the best thing we have going, no matter who it, even if it's Bo Nix, is we have the infrastructure there. There's no doubt about it. It was cerebral, systemic by Kwesi Adoffa-Mensah. I mean, even Rick Spielman with the Jefferson pick and Kevin O'Connell. Everything is there. If we draft whoever this guy is of these, I say 6, and the guy is Ponder, the guy flops, what else can we do? Like, you got the quarterback head coach. You got Josh McCown. You got Jefferson, Addison, Hawkinson, Darisaw. You're going to be like, what? Do we have to go back to a defensive coach? What are we going to do? Like, everything is there. And so it will be mind-boggling if they settle on whoever their guy is, and then we're chilling on April 10th, 2026, 2027, saying, hey, remember when McCarthy, we thought he was good? It's going to be really weird if we have to do that. Who's your number 2?
Number 2 is Jaden Daniels. I think I do have a lot of the same concerns as you do in terms of the injury. I think his play is absolutely fantastic. It's not really a coincidence that as soon as he got there, LSU started turning things around because they desperately needed a quarterback, and he was the guy to be able to fill that role. I think 2022 from Jaden Daniels is a little bit more impressive than 2023 just because his wide receivers weren't as developed, and he still managed to beat Alabama, find ways to win games with that team. But yeah, the injury concern, it's up there, man. It's the one thing that really, really scares me if the Vikings end up drafting Jaden Daniels, because you say he plays like Lamar Jackson a lot in terms of his, I think he plays like Josh Allen, except he's about 30 to 40 pounds lighter than Josh Allen. He's a guy he's just not afraid to just run into defenders. And a lot of times he gets blown up. And I mean, it's great that he's not scared out in the pocket at all. Like, there is no fear in his game. But I mean, at the same time, you got to be able to preserve your health, and running into defenders that are going to be 20 to 30 pounds heavier than any of the guys you were playing in college it could be a recipe for disaster. But in Minnesota, I mean, we saw after the first game of Josh Dobbs, all of a sudden he wasn't running anymore. And I think that's something that Kevin O'Connell is able to at least limit a little bit in terms of Daniel's game, is just making these really erratic rushing decisions, and just being more content to stand in the pocket and throw. If they were doing it with Josh Dobbs on a week's notice, I think they can definitely do it with Daniels in a few months. But the injury is definitely a concern for me, and that would be the one hesitation that I have with him if the Vikings end up drafting him.
Now, the one cool thing is if he slides to the Vikings and we're all wrong about this Commanders thing, is you can probably sign that Jefferson contract the next day.
Definitely.
There ain't no way he's like, I don't want that LSU chump on my team. That would probably be Jefferson's, assuming that brotherhood is as deep as we're told at LSU, then that would be almost the next day you could see it on the way. My number 2 is Caleb Williams. And I don't have anything negative to say about him as a football player. I still don't understand why every play has to be like this playground play, but evidently the offensive line sucked there, so I'm not going to nitpick it. So everything about his size, his age, his performance at USC, and then the throws, I don't have anything negative to say about it. So the only reason I have him below Drake May, who I'll talk about in a moment, he's three things that I can't shake. Number one, he's going to the Bears. And this is a Vikings podcast, and I just have to assume that they're going to find a way to mess it up. And if they want to say that about the Vikings on their show, I understand. Go ahead and say it. I just, there's this beautiful paranoia that I have, like, hey, well, Caleb's going to the Bears, so not going to work out. That's the penalty you pay when you've had, besides Jay Cutler, like just 30 years, 40 years worth of quarterback futility, is that they're going to find a way to do it again. So an unfair bias that I have towards Williams is he's going to Chicago, and is that really going to work? The other one that I have is if his perceived moodiness, or whatever you want to call it, is at all like Kyler Murray, I swear that's the only thing that separates Kyler Murray from being what we consider a top 10 quarterback. On his best Sundays, Kyler Murray is probably top 10, but you never know if you're going to get it. So I always wonder if Williams is going to have the same rub as he's pissed. And so now he doesn't want to talk to anybody today. That's my other unfair criticism. And then the hype as the first overall pick. In my lifetime, only Peyton Manning and I guess Stafford, because he got a Super Bowl ring, are the only two guys, in my opinion, at quarterback that have ever lived up to it. Andrew Luck was Burrow, I guess. Dang it. All right, my bad. And then Andrew Luck was well on his way until he retired. There's just too many strikeouts at the first overall pick for me to guarantee that Williams is going to be good. Now, because he's going to the Bears, and that's good news for the Bears, they probably will be good and get off the schneid. But that is my long speech as to why I don't have him at number one. And I think that brings you to number one, right?
Number one is Caleb Williams. Yeah. I do hear some of the concerns there. I think for once the Bears have kind of gone about this the right way, where they didn't rush into a quarterback last year. And I mean, that's the opposite of what they did in 2021 when they traded up to go get Justin Fields. So I think that they finally decided that, hey, we're going to get a defense in place. They went and got Montez Sweat. They have the opportunity to draft another really good edge rusher with their number 9 overall pick, or whatever they want. If it's a wide receiver, if it's an offensive tackle, if it's a cornerback, whatever they want to do at number 9, they can also fill that need there. And then they finally just gone out and got some really solid wide receivers for him too, in terms of DJ Moore, and then this offseason Keenan Allen, and it's finally feeling like they're putting the pieces in place for a quarterback to finally succeed there. So that's why I'm not as scared of him. I mean, from a Vikings perspective, I'm very scared of him going to the Bears, but in terms of his fit there, I think it's a little bit better than some of the quarterbacks in years past. And then just the talent, man. There definitely is a lot of backyard football there in terms of Williams, especially this past season. I think 2022 was a little bit better, just because they had a little bit of a better offensive line. Then Jordan Addison was there catching passes for him too, so that definitely helped. But I think just the fact that he's proven that he's able to run an offense really well when it's chaos all the time, I think that does put him at number one for me, just with that ability. Like, if he's scrambling out of the pocket, he's going to be able to make whatever throw you want him to make. Some of the he's making jump passes just for fun. He does that all the time at USC. I think that's just a really tantalizing skill set. And maybe it's a little bit contradictory for me to have him at number one because of that, when I knocked guys like Spencer Rattler for having the same sort of thing. But I just think Williams does it a lot better and a lot more consistently than Rattler does. But yeah, I think that ultimately is why he's number one for me. I'd be very stunned if 5 years from now we're looking at Caleb Williams as a bust.
Well, there's a difference between Rattler doing it and Caleb Williams doing it. It's like Steph Curry when he started the 3-point revolution, like shooting them 6 feet back. Like, normally you'd be like, what are you doing? But when he does it, it's fine. But when some other moron does it, you're like, no.
Swaggy P.
Yeah. So, yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. It's cool for Caleb to do it, yes, because he does it good. With Rattler, you're like, oh, no. One thing I want to say before I get to Drake May as my number one is I'm really surprised that with all of the draft takes that everybody cooks up, including us, I'm surprised there isn't any about the Bears doing what they did last year. Trading down, getting another sweet King's ransom trade to like number 3 or number 4, because they could do that and then they could have Drake May or JJ McCarthy, 2 first rounders, a DJ Moore type. And it's just weird to me that we haven't had anything about that. Once they traded Fields, it was like, oh, they're drafting Caleb. I would have thought by now there would have been some sort of malarkey that suggested, hey, the Bears might move off that spot because they can get multiple first rounders, a player, and then, by the way, draft DJ McCarthy as well. And we haven't heard a single smidgen about that. So I was thinking about that earlier today, that you would think that something would come out, but nope, evidently not. Drake May is my first overall because he has the youth. He'll turn 22 in August. He has the size. Was 6'4" and change and 225, 230. And that's just as a coming out of college. By the time we're chilling 3 or 4 years from now, he probably will be Justin Herbert or Josh Allen size. He has the arm. He has the mobility. I don't care about the footwork if it needs a little work. So this is exactly how I arrived last year at CJ Stroud as my top guy, is that there wasn't enough weaknesses for me to get anxiety about them. And then you watch the tape and you're like, oofda. With CJ Stroud, the kicker was playing in huge games, plus having all of the lack of weaknesses. There just wasn't a lot to criticize. And for May, it's that if you think about it based on, his fit with the Vikings, he's basically a good combination of Kirk, Dobbs, and Mullins. I believe he can be as consistent as Kirk, a pocket passer when you need him to be. He's probably not as fast as Dobbs, but he will have the inkling to get out and move, unlike Kirk. And then I remain completely believable in, if it's 3rd and 17, like with Nick Mullins, we're like, sweet, he's going to get in his bag. With Kirk, it was 3rd and 17. I'd just say punt it. Don't even bother. Yeah. They're going to screw it up. He's going to hand it off is what they're going to do. But with Drake May and Nick Mullins, I'm like 3rd and 17. This should be gravy. This is where they were born for. So you take all of those things we experienced last year, for better or for worse, and I think Drake May has those qualities. When it comes down to it for me, I know he didn't have last season. He didn't have tremendous weapons. But I often think about if Drake May was on the Wolverines and JJ McCarthy was on the Tar Heels, like what would we be thinking here? So ultimately, I think it's the arm strength that entrances me and the throws that he can make. And then the only knock, even I think the pro Kirk or Kirk stands, whatever they're called, is that he just, even though early in his career, Kirk had some wheels and he used them in Washington, just never used them for the Vikings. And I will always say that if somebody would have gotten Kirk's ear and asked him to take off and run for first downs 4 times per game or something like that, he would have been beloved, because he would have looked like Fran at times, but he was so skittish about doing it. It felt like a holiday when he did it. We're like, oh my God. Like, remember that one that he took off and O'Connell was like, what was that?
What the hell was that?
Yeah. So that's my Drake May speech. And we counted them down from 8 to 1. Is there anything that we missed in general today, Josh?
Oh, not really. I think in terms of going back to maybe the Bears not being interested in trading down to number 1, trading down from number 1, I really thought that they would be interested in doing that early on. And I said it on this show, like after the Vikings traded for number 23, I was like, hey, maybe the Bears, if you look at it, like number 9, number 11, number 23, that's a pretty solid package. But at the end of the day, I mean, it just seems like they're that in love with Caleb Williams. And I mean, I understand it from the skill set. But I mean, the visit that he had Ian Rappaport basically described it as less of an evaluation and more of a just get to know you introduction to the team, the facilities, everything. It just sounded like one big party over there instead of actually getting on the field and working. So I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. But I don't know. It'd be a really tough decision for me, at least, not to trade down to number 3, grab more picks, and just ride with whoever you end up with there.
What could they get from the Patriots? Let's say the Patriots decide they loved Caleb.
Oh, man.
Number 3 and what else?
Number 3, at least one more first-round pick. probably a second or a third, maybe both. I mean, there's a lot that you get for that, especially when it's Caleb Williams that you're going up and getting. I mean, yeah, it's very interesting. I wonder what it looks like in an alternate timeline where the Bears end up doing that, because I think in terms of constructing a roster, you've already got a pretty decent infrastructure there.
Yeah.
You can get even better and honestly turn into a Vikings-esque landing spot for a quarterback if you end up doing that. But I don't know, maybe Caleb Williams is just the guy to fix their problems.
And I think this theory from us has a lot to do with we've become so ingrained in how good McCarthy and May can be, that we're like, well, screw Caleb Williams. But for them, it must be the sin of the century to pass on Williams. And maybe their choice was binary for months. Like, is it Fields? We're gonna talk ourselves into this again, or is it Williams? And then somebody said, like, it's Williams. Don't get any ideas.
And I mean, when you pass on Patrick Mahomes, I definitely get why you just, okay, we're just gonna take the top quarterback on the board. We're not messing around.
I hear you. All right, here is the schedule upcoming. We'll be off tomorrow. Friday, I believe we're gonna have fan guests, a panel of about 3. And then this weekend, let's see, I believe we talk with Sean Kenner on Sunday night. That should post late Sunday night, Monday morning. And then Monday, Sean Borman, our capologist at VikingsTerritory.com. Tuesday, the new boss man at Vikings Wire, Andrew Harbaugh. I don't think he's related, folks. Wednesday, Dave Richard, correct, Josh?
Yes.
Yep. And he is from CBS Sports. And then Friday, a week from tomorrow, Thor will be back, and we're going to ask him about Malik Willis. And I'm not sure if we'll get a draft prediction or if he's going to be back a second time after that. But that's the itinerary. Josh, we took up a long time today going through these quarterback rankings. Thank you for your time, and we'll talk to you before too long, all right?
Sounds great, man. See you then.
Yep, later.